Alright everyone, settle in for tonight's exploration. We're veering off the well-trodden path of heroic sagas and stepping into something a touch more unvarnished. Prepare for a deep dive not into the romanticized courts of chivalrous knights or the quaint charm of medieval villages, but into the desperate, fear-soaked daily existence within a 14th-century European city as the Black Death tightened its ghastly grip. That tapestry image of a bustling medieval marketplace or a grand cathedral spire reaching for a benevolent sky. Well, the unvarnished truth for those living through the great mortality was often a far cry, a nightmarish landscape of sudden death, societal collapse and overwhelming despair, and frankly your modern understanding of disease and public health would feel like an unimaginable miracle. So find your coziest spot. If you appreciate a journey into the raw, unfiltered past, a like on the video would be fantastic, and do consider subscribing for more of these historical reality checks. As always, I'm curious to know where you're joining us from tonight. Drop a comment with your location and time. It's always a highlight seeing our global community. Okay, perhaps dim those lights. Let a soft ambient sound fill the room and let's embark on tonight's rather sobering journey together. Your world, once vibrant with the familiar sounds of a thriving city, the clatter of carts, the cries of vendors, the chime of church bells, has begun to fall eerily silent. Whispers arrived first, carried on merchant ships from the east, tales of a devastating pestilence that turned men black and consumed them in days. You dismissed them perhaps as sailors' exaggerations, distant horrors that could never touch your well-ordered life in, say, Paris, Florence or a bustling Hanseatic town. But then the whispers grew louder, closer, until one day the first unfamiliar sickness, the first telltale swellings, appeared within your own city walls. Fear, a cold and insidious serpent, begins to coil around the heart of your community. Initially, life attempts to continue as normal. Markets still open, though with a nervous energy. The church bells still ring, calling the faithful to pray for deliverance. But as the deaths mount, quickly, inexplicably, panic starts to set in. Neighbors you saw healthy yesterday are gone today, their doors ominously shut. A wisp of smoke from a cleansing fire, perhaps the only sign of the tragedy within. The familiar fabric of your society starts to fray at an alarming rate. The physicians in their long robes and bird-like masks stuffed with herbs, a later iconic image, though rudimentary protective measures were attempted, are powerless. Their theories of miasma, of an imbalance of humors, of planetary conjunctions, offer no cure, no real understanding. Bleeding, purging, the lancing of bobas. Their treatments are often more torturous than the disease itself, and just as ineffective. You see them hurrying through the streets, their faces grim, their remedies useless against the invisible tide washing over you all. Their authority, once respected, crumbles with each new victim. The symptoms are terrifying and swift. A sudden fever, chills and a crushing headache are often the first sign. Then come the agonizingly painful swellings, the bobas, in the groin, armpits or neck. Hard, dark and hot to the touch. Black spots, the tokens of God, might appear on the skin, a sure sign that death is imminent. Vomiting of blood, delirium and an unbearable stench often accompany the final agonizing hours. There is little dignity in this passing, only horror and putrefaction. The sheer speed of the plague's passage through a household is bewildering. One family member falls ill, and within days the entire household can be consumed. Parents watch their children die, children watch their parents. The bonds of kinship are stretched to their breaking point. Who will care for the sick when to do so is almost a death sentence in itself? Who will bury the dead when the living are too terrified, or too few? These are the impossible questions your world now faces. The normal rhythms of life collapse. Shops close as artisans and merchants sicken and die, or flee in terror. Fields outside the city walls lie untended as peasants succumb or abandon their villages. The economy grinds to a halt. Food supplies dwindle, and prices for what little is available soar. Hunger becomes a companion to fear, further weakening those who have so far escaped the plague's touch. The bustling city becomes a hollow shell. The streets, once crowded and alive, grow deserted. Grass may begin to sprout between the cobblestones. The only sounds are the wails of mourners, the rumble of the death carts, the tolling of bells, for the endless dead, and perhaps the eerie silence of abandonment. You hurry through these empty thoroughfares, clutching a pomander of herbs to your nose, avoiding contact with anyone, your eyes darting nervously, seeing a potential carrier in every shadow, every fellow human. The disposal of the dead becomes an overwhelming crisis. Cemeteries fill rapidly, then overflow. Mass graves are dug, hastily consecrated pits into which bodies are thrown, layer upon layer with little ceremony. The traditional rites of passage, the comfort of a Christian burial are often denied. You might see bodies lying in the streets, abandoned by families too terrified or too grief-stricken to deal with them. The air itself feels heavy with the presence of unburied death. Flight is the first instinct for many who can afford it. The wealthy nobility, rich merchants, and even some clergy abandon the cities for their country estates, hoping to outrun the pestilence. But the plague often travels with them, hidden in their baggage or carried by their servant. Their flight, while understandable, leaves the city bereft of leadership and resources, accelerating the societal collapse. For you, perhaps a craftsman or a laborer, escape is not an option. You are trapped. Religious fervor intensifies, mixed with desperate superstition. Processions of flagellants whip themselves through the streets, hoping to atone for the sins they believe have brought this divine wrath upon mankind. Others flock to churches, praying day and night, wearing amulets, reciting charms. Yet priests and monks, tending to the sick and dying, succumb in vast numbers, shaking the faith of many. If God's own servants are not spared, what hope is there for ordinary sinners? Scapegoats are sought, as they always are in times of inexplicable terror. Minority groups, particularly Jewish communities, are often baselessly accused of poisoning wells, or deliberately spreading the plague. Vicious pogroms erupt in some areas, adding man-made horror to the natural one. Fear and ignorance create a fertile ground for hatred and violence, a dark stain on an already dark time. You witness this madness, powerless to stop it. The social order inverts. Servants, if they survive, might find themselves in positions of unexpected power as their masters perish. Peasants might seize abandoned lands. The traditional hierarchies, once seemingly immutable, are shaken to their core. Wills are hastily written, often leaving fortunes to the church, or to distant unknown relatives, if any can be found alive. The very concept of inheritance becomes a macabre lottery. The psychological impact is immense. The constant fear, the daily sight of death and suffering, the loss of loved ones, the collapse of everything familiar, it creates a pervasive atmosphere of trauma and despair. Many succumb to a fatalistic apathy, believing their turn is next, regardless of what they do. Others live in a state of heightened anxiety, every cough, every ache, a potential death sentence. The world feels like it is ending. The bonds of family and friendship are brutally tested. Some individuals rise to heights of selfless heroism, tending to sick loved ones at immense personal risk. Others, consumed by terror, abandon their closest relatives, even their own children, to die alone. You see the best and worst of human nature laid bare, and it is a terrifying, disillusioning spectacle. There are no easy judgments in such a desperate time. Imagine the silence of a home where an entire family has perished. The food left untouched on the table, the beds unmade, the laughter silenced forever. Or the terror of being the sole survivor in your household, surrounded by the ghosts of those you loved, waiting for the symptoms to appear in your own body. The loneliness, the grief, the survivor's guilt, these are wounds that may never heal. Quarantine measures, when attempted, are often brutal and ineffective. Houses where the plague has struck are sometimes sealed, with the healthy and the sick trapped inside together, left to their guards might be posted to prevent anyone from entering or leaving. These desperate attempts to contain the contagion often turn homes into tombs. The cries from within these sealed houses are a haunting reminder of the city's agony. The economy is in ruin. With so many workers and consumers dead, trade dries up, guilds lose their masters and apprentices. The price of labor for those few who survive and are willing to work might temporarily skyrocket, leading to social unrest and attempts by the authorities to control wages. The intricate web of medieval commerce is torn apart, with long-lasting consequences. Superstitions surrounding contagion abound. People avoid eye contact, hold their breath when passing others, burn pungent herbs to cleanse the air. Cats and dogs are sometimes killed in the mistaken belief that they spread the disease, an act that ironically worsens the rat problem, as rats and their fleas are the true vectors. Every shadow, every unusual smell, every rumor, fuels the rampant paranoia. The sights are unendurable. The death carts, piled high with contorted bodies, trundling through the streets to the overflowing plague pits. The vacant stares of the dying, their skin discolored, their bodies racked with pain. The desperate, often futile efforts of loved ones to offer comfort. These images are seared into your memory, recurring in your nightmares long after the immediate danger has passed, if you are one of the fortunate. Personal hygiene, already a challenge in a medieval city, becomes even more difficult. Water sources can become contaminated. Soap is a luxury few can afford. The filth and squalor in the poorer quarters, where overcrowding is rampant, provide a perfect breeding ground for the disease. You feel perpetually unclean, a layer of grime and fear clinging to your skin. The role of the church is complex, and often contradictory. While many clergy members bravely minister to the sick and dying, others flee. The church offers spiritual solace, and the promise of an afterlife, but its inability to stop the plague, or explain its divine purpose in a satisfactory way, leads to a crisis of faith for some. New, more mystical or penitential religious movements may gain traction in the aftermath. Food becomes a source of constant anxiety. Is it safe to eat? Has it been touched by the infected? With farmers dying or abandoning their fields, shortages are common. You might subsist on stale bread, a few withered vegetables, or whatever you can scavenge. The communal aspect of meals, once a source of comfort, is replaced by solitary, fearful consumption. The legal system struggles to cope. With so many dead, inheritances are contested. Properties left abandoned. Courts may cease to function. Lawlessness can increase as desperation grows, and the traditional forces of order are weakened or decimated. You might witness looting, or desperate individuals, fighting over scraps of food or shelter. The veneer of civilization wears thin. The sounds of the dying city are unforgettable. The tolling of the death knell from church towers, once a solemn and infrequent sound, becomes a near constant dirge. The cries of "Bring out your dead" from the cart collectors echo in the empty streets. The sudden sharp screams of grief or terror from a nearby, and sometimes an unnatural pervasive silence that speaks of wholesale abandonment. Children are particularly vulnerable, their small bodies often succumbing quickly. The sight of a child's funeral, or a tiny shrouded form on a death cart, is an especially heartbreaking torment. Many are orphaned, left to fend for themselves in a terrifying and indifferent world, their innocence shattered, their future stolen. Their plight is a stark symbol of the plague's cruelty. The very air you breathe feels tainted, heavy with the threat of invisible death. You cover your mouth and nose with a cloth, though you know it offers little real protection. Every breeze, every draft, feels like it could carry the fatal miasma. You become suspicious of your own senses, unable to trust what you see, smell or touch. Simple human contact, once a source of comfort and community, becomes a source of terror. You recoil from the touch of others, even loved ones, fearing contagion. Greetings are exchanged from a distance. The warmth of a handshake, the embrace of a friend, are now dangerous, potentially fatal, gestures. This isolation exacerbates the psychological distress. The desperation leads to bizarre and often harmful remedies. Potions made from crushed emeralds, arsenic, or unicorn horn, likely narwhal tusk, are sold at exorbitant prices by quacks and charlatans preying on the terrified populace. People might sit between two large fires, hoping to sweat out the poison, or avoid bathing, believing it opens the pores to the miasma. Hope in its most twisted forms persists. As the first wave of the plague begins to subside in your city, a strange new world emerges. The streets are emptier, the population drastically reduced. There are gaps in every family, every workshop, every guild. The silence is punctuated by the sounds of rebuilding, but also by a lingering fear. Will it return? This question hangs heavy in the air. The psychological scars on the survivors are deep. Many suffer from what we might now call post-traumatic stress, haunted by what they have witnessed and endured. A sense of fatalism, or conversely, a reckless abandon, might seize some. The experience has irrevocably changed their worldview, their understanding of life, death, and divinity. The economic consequences are profound and long-lasting. Labor shortages lead to rising wages for peasants and artisans, shifting the balance of power between landowners and workers. Land ownership patterns change. The old feudal order is further weakened. The Black Death, in its horrific passage, acts as an unwitting catalyst for social and economic transformation. You may find yourself inheriting property or a position you never expected, simply by virtue of outliving others. Or you may find your livelihood gone, your skills no longer in demand, in a depopulated world. Life is a lottery, and the plague has redrawn all the tickets. The future is uncertain, filled with both new, unsettling possibilities, and a profound sense of loss. The memory of the stench of death, the feel of a loved one's fevered skin, the sight of the death carts, these sensory details will remain with you for the rest of your day. They are the unwelcome souvenirs of a time when the world seemed to teeter on the brink of annihilation, when humanity was brought to its knees by an invisible, implacable foe. Daily tasks, once mundane, are now fraught with a new awareness of mortality. Preparing food, drawing water, even walking down the street, each action is overlaid with the memory of a time when these simple acts could be deadly. You look at your neighbors, your fellow survivors, with a new understanding, a shared knowledge of the abyss you have all looked into. The city slowly begins to breathe again, but it is a changed city. Many of the old landmarks may still stand, but the human landscape is altered forever. There are empty houses, overgrown gardens, workshops with silent tools. The laughter of children, when it returns, sounds different, more precious, against the backdrop of so much loss. Superstition and religious devotion may take on new forms. Some will cling more tightly to traditional faith, seeing survival as a sign of God's mercy. Others may turn to more esoteric or folk practices, seeking new ways to ward off future calamities. The fear of the plague's return will linger for generations, shaping cultural practices and anxiety. You might find yourself part of a smaller, more tightly knit community of survivors, bound by shared experience, or you might feel profoundly isolated, unable to connect with those who did not witness the full horror. The social fabric, though torn, will begin to reweave itself, but the patterns will be different, the threads weaker in some places, unexpectedly stronger in others. The sheer randomness of survival is a difficult thing to comprehend. Why you, and not your neighbor, your sibling, there is no rhyme or reason to it, no moral calculus. This arbitrary nature of life and death, so starkly revealed by the plague, can be a source of lifelong existential unease. The skills of the dead are artisans, scholars, musicians, a whole generation's worth of knowledge and talent, wiped out. Rebuilding will take time, and the loss of this human capital will slow the city's recovery. The vibrancy and complexity of medieval urban life are significantly diminished, at least for a time. You learn to live with a heightened sense of hygiene, if only out of residual fear. You might wash your hands more frequently, be more cautious about food and water sources, and avoid overly crowded places. These are small, almost unconscious, adaptations born of a terrifying collective memory. The stories of the plague years will be told and retold, passed down through generations, often embellished or distorted, but always carrying a core of remembered terror. They will become part of your city's folklore, a grim reminder of its darkest hour. You are now a living part of that story. The value of human life itself may be subtly re-evaluated. When death is so common, so indiscriminate, does life become cheaper, or more precious? Different individuals will arrive at different conclusions, but no one who lived through the Black Death will ever look at life and death in quite the same way again. The empty spaces in the city, the abandoned homes and workshops, are a constant visual reminder of the scale of the catastrophe. It will take years, perhaps decades, for the population to recover, for the city to regain its former vitality. The plague leaves not just graves, but a void in the urban landscape. You might find yourself with unexpected responsibilities, caring for orphaned children, taking over a deceased relative's business, or participating in the civic efforts to restore order and cleanliness. The crisis forces ordinary people to assume extraordinary roles, testing their resilience and their capacity for compassion. The fear of animals, particularly rats and even domestic pets, may linger. Though the true mechanism of transmission, fleas on rats, was not understood, people made associations, and these fears, however misguided, can be hard to shake. Every scurrying sound, every stray animal, can trigger a pang of remembered anxiety. The simple act of gathering with others, for a market day, a religious festival, or a guild meeting, will forever be tinged with the memory of when such gatherings were a prelude to mass death. A shadow hangs over communal life, a reminder of its fragility. The taste of uncontaminated water, the smell of fresh bread, the sight of a healthy child playing, these simple things once taken for granted, now evoke a profound sense of gratitude, mixed with the sorrow of remembering when they were so cruelly absent or threatened. Your appreciation for the basics of life is forever sharpened. As you help to rebuild your shattered world, you carry the ghosts of the dead with you. They are in the empty chairs at your table, in the silent workshops, in the half-finished tasks they left behind. Their absence is a palpable presence, shaping the future of your city and your own life.
in ways you are only beginning to understand. This medieval city, your home, is now a landscape of memory and resilience.
In the waning years of the 15th century, the city of Milan, under the ambitious and often ruthless rule of Ludovico Sforza, known as Il Moro for his dark complexion, pulsed with the vibrant energy of the Italian Renaissance. Ludovico, though technically regent for his young nephew, wielded absolute power, transforming Milan into a lavish court, a center of art, music and military innovation. He sought to project an image of magnificence and cultured authority, and to this end he gathered around him some of the most brilliant talents of the age. Among these luminaries was a Florentine artist and engineer of almost mythical versatility, a man whose restless intellect explored everything from human anatomy to the flight of birds, from hydraulic engineering to the subtle play of light on a human face. This was Leonardo da Vinci, a man already renowned for his genius, yet equally notorious for his perfectionism, his intellectual diversions, and his frustrating tendency to leave ambitious projects unfinished. It was to this singular individual that Ludovico entrusted a commission that would result in one of the most iconic and emotionally resonant images in the history of Western art, a work destined for a quiet wall, in a Dominican convent, yet fated for centuries of adoration, agony, and miraculous survival. The chosen site was the refectory, the communal dining hall, of the convent of Santa Maria delle Grazie, a church and Dominican monastery that Ludovico was lavishing with patronage, intending it in part as a Sforza family mausoleum. The north wall of this spacious hall, where the monks would gather for their daily meals and spiritual reflection, was designated for a depiction of the Last Supper. Such a scene portraying Christ's final meal with his apostles was a traditional subject for monastery refectories, serving as a poignant reminder to the dining monks of the Eucharist's institution and the solemn events that were to follow. But the work Leonardo was to create here would be anything but traditional. Leonardo, who had arrived in Milan around 1482, offering his services to Ludovico primarily as a military engineer and architect, but also as a painter and sculptor, approached this commission with his characteristic blend of profound intellectual inquiry and artistic innovation. He was not content to merely replicate the static, often formulaic, depictions of the Last Supper common at the time, which typically showed the apostles arranged passively around a table, with Judas often isolated on the opposite side. Leonardo envisioned a moment of intense psychological drama, a frozen instant of profound human emotion. He chose to depict the precise moment after Christ has uttered the devastating words, "Amen, I say to you, one of you will betray me." It is this announcement that electrifies the scene, sending a shockwave of disbelief, horror, and agitated questioning through the assembled apostles. For months, perhaps years, before even beginning to paint on the wall, Leonardo immersed himself in the conceptualization of the work. His notebooks from this period are filled with sketches of heads and hands, studies of expressions, consternation, grief, anger, doubt, as he sought to capture the unique personality and reaction of each of the 12 apostles. He pondered the nature of Christ's divine sorrow and the dark, brooding isolation of Judas. He frequented the bustling streets and taverns of Milan, observing faces, gestures, and human interactions, searching for models who could embody the characters he envisioned. Legend has it that he struggled particularly to find a face sufficiently villainous for Judas, and conversely, one pure enough for Christ, leading to considerable delays. Leonardo's innovative spirit extended not only to the psychological depth of his portrayal, but also to his choice of artistic technique. Traditional fresco painting, which involved applying pigments to wet plaster, required swift, decisive execution, as the plaster dried quickly, making corrections difficult. This method did not suit Leonardo's famously deliberate and contemplative approach. He desired the ability to work slowly, to build up layers of color, to achieve the subtle gradations of light and shadow, his famous sfumato, and to make alterations as his ideas evolved. Consequently, he opted for an experimental technique, treating the dry plaster wall of the refectory as if it were a wooden panel or canvas. He reportedly sealed the stone wall with a layer of gesso, pitch, and mastic, then applied his pigments, possibly tempera mixed with oil, directly onto this dry ground. This bold experiment, while allowing him the artistic freedom he craved, was to prove disastrous for the painting's long-term survival, as the north wall of the refectory was notoriously prone to dampness, and the unconventional materials did not adhere well to the underlying surface. The actual execution of the mural occupied Leonardo, intermittently, between approximately 1495 and the prior of the convent, impatient with the artist's seemingly erratic progress and long periods of apparent inactivity, complained to Ludovico, Leonardo. According to the writer Matteo Bandello, who as a novice monk at Santa Maria delle Grazie, often observed the artist at work, would sometimes arrive early, mount the scaffolding, and spend hours contemplating the painting without making a single brush stroke, only to suddenly seize his brushes, work intensely for a short while, and then depart. When pressed by the prior, Leonardo is said to have wittily retorted that he was still searching for a sufficiently villainous face for Judas, and if he could not find one, he might be tempted to use the prior's own. Such was Leonardo's confident, if sometimes aloof demeanor. He toiled with a fierce, if unhurried intensity, meticulously crafting each figure, each gesture, each fold of drapery, striving for a realism and emotional depth that would transcend mere representation. The composition Leonardo devised was revolutionary. He arranged the apostles in 4 groups of 3 around Christ, who sits serenely yet sorrowfully at the center, forming the calm eye of the emotional storm he has unleashed. The perspective of the room, with all lines converging on Christ's head, draws the viewer directly into the scene, making the painted space appear as an extension of the refectory itself. Light seems to emanate from Christ, and also to flow from a painted window behind him, as well as from the actual windows on the refectory's left wall, creating a complex and naturalistic illumination. The apostles are not isolated figures, but are dynamically interconnected through their gestures, their gazes, and their shared shock. Peter lunges forward, his hand on a knife, foreshadowing his later defense of Christ. John, the beloved disciple, swoons in grief. Judas, clutching a bag of silver and recoiling into shadow, overturns a salt cellar, an omen of misfortune. Each apostle's reaction is a miniature psychological portrait, a study in human nature under duress. When the Last Supper was finally completed, or at least brought to a state Leonardo considered finished, around 1498, its impact was immediate and profound. Contemporary viewers were astonished by its lifelike naturalism, its emotional intensity, and its masterful illusion of depth. It was hailed as a triumph, instantly recognized as a work that had redefined the depiction of this sacred narrative. Artists and connoisseurs flocked to see it, and its fame quickly spread throughout Italy and beyond. Disseminated through copies and engravings, it became a new benchmark, influencing generations of artists who sought to emulate its psychological realism and dramatic power. Yet even as The Last Supper was garnering universal acclaim, the seeds of its physical destruction were already beginning to germinate. Leonardo's experimental technique, combined with the damp, humid conditions of the refectory wall, proved to be a catastrophic combination. Within a few decades of its completion, the paint began to flake, the colors to fade, and the surface to deteriorate. Giorgio Vasari, writing in the mid-16th century, described the painting as already ruined. The agony of the Last Supper had begun, a slow, inexorable decay that would span centuries. Over the next 500 years, the masterpiece endured a relentless series of misfortunes and indignity. The humidity of the wall, exacerbated by steam from the nearby kitchen and the refectory's own use, caused persistent moisture problems. Early attempts at restoration, often undertaken with good intentions, but limited understanding of Leonardo's materials, frequently did more harm than good. Well-meaning restorers applied varnishes that darkened over time, repainted flaking sections, and sometimes even altered Leonardo's original composition to suit contemporary tastes, or to brighten what they perceived as faded colors. Each intervention added another layer of foreign material, further obscuring the delicate original. The refectory itself was subjected to various mésalliances. In the 17th century, a doorway was inexplicably cut through the bottom center of the mural, obliterating Christ's feet and part of the table. During Napoleon's Italian campaign in the late 18th century, French troops, billeted in the refectory, reportedly used the space as a stable and armory. They amused themselves by throwing stones or clay pellets at the apostles' heads, and were said to have scratched out their eyes. The wall became a target for casual vandalism, a testament to the ignorance and barbarity that can sometimes accompany conquest. Further restorations followed in the 19th and early 20th centuries, each attempting to address the worsening condition of the painting, but often employing invasive techniques
that removed more of Leonardo's fragile original paint layer, or covered it with yet more retouch. The delicate nuances of Leonardo's brushwork, the subtle modeling of faces and drapery, became increasingly buried under a crust of grime, discolored varnish, and crude overpaint. The most dramatic threat to the painting's existence came during the Second World War. On the night of August 15, 1943, an Allied aerial bomb struck the convent of Santa Maria delle Grazie. The refectory's roof and east wall collapsed, and other walls were severely damaged. Miraculously, the north wall bearing the Last Supper survived, largely thanks to the protective scaffolding and sandbagging that had been erected around it by vigilant Italian authorities. However, the painting was left exposed to the elements for several months, amidst the rubble, suffering further from changes in humidity and temperature before a temporary shelter could be constructed. It was a testament to the painting's iconic status, that even amidst the chaos of war, efforts were made to protect it, and its survival was hailed as a near miracle. In the post-war years, the dire condition of the Last Supper became a matter of urgent international concern. Several more conservation efforts were undertaken, but it was clear that a more radical, scientifically informed approach was needed, if anything of Leonardo's original work was to be salvaged and preserved for future generations. This led to the monumental restoration campaign that began in 1978, and lasted for over 2 decades, concluding in 1999, under the leadership of Dr. Penin Brambilla Barcelon. This was not a restoration in the traditional sense of repainting or improving the image. Instead, it was a painstaking, almost archaeological process of scientific investigation and meticulous removal. Using microscopes, solvents, and surgical precision, Brambilla and her team slowly, centimeter by centimeter, worked to remove the centuries of accumulated dirt, grime, darkened varnishes, and multiple layers of clumsy overpaint, applied by previous restorers. Their goal was to uncover and stabilize whatever remained of Leonardo's original brushstrokes, however faint or fragmented. It was an extraordinarily challenging and controversial undertaking. Each decision, what to remove, what to leave, how to consolidate the fragile original pigment, was fraught with difficulty and subject to intense scrutiny from the art world. The results of this lengthy restoration were revelatory, and for some shocking. Much of what people had long believed to be the Last Supper was, in fact, the work of later hands. When the layers of obfuscation were finally stripped away, what emerged was a more luminous, yet also a more ghostly image. Many areas were irrevocably lost, the original paint having completely detached from the wall. Yet in other areas, particularly in the details of faces, hands, and drapery, fragments of Leonardo's exquisite original artistry, his subtle color harmonies and delicate modeling, were rediscovered, offering a tantalizing glimpse of the painting's former glory. The restoration stabilized the work, ensuring its survival for the foreseeable future, but it also laid bare the true extent of the damage it had suffered over 5 centuries. Today, Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper stands as a poignant testament to both the power of human genius and the relentless forces of decay. It is a faded masterpiece, a fragile echo of its original splendor, yet it continues to exert a profound emotional and spiritual power over all who behold it. The psychological drama of the scene, the humanity of the apostles, the serene divinity of Christ, these qualities shine through, even in its damaged state. It remains one of the most reproduced and instantly recognizable paintings in the world, its influence on art and popular culture immeasurable. The story of The Last Supper is a narrative of extraordinary artistic ambition, of technical misjudgment, of centuries of neglect and abuse, and of a remarkable if imperfect resurrection. It reflects Leonardo's relentless quest for perfection, his desire to push the boundaries of his art, even at the risk of its permanence. It also speaks to the enduring human drive to create beauty and meaning, and the equally persistent, often heroic efforts to preserve these precious creations against the ravages of time and human folly. The wall in the refectory of Santa Maria delle Grazie holds more than just a painting. It holds a history of faith, genius, fragility, and resilience. A silent, somber, yet ultimately inspiring testament to the enduring conversation between art and eternity.
The high Andes, a majestic spine of mountains piercing the South American sky, cradle a world of breathtaking beauty and formidable challenges. Here, amidst snow-capped peaks, fertile valleys, and arid plateaus, civilizations rose and fell, adapting with remarkable ingenuity to the diverse and often harsh environments. In the 15th century of the Common Era, From a modest kingdom nestled in the Cusco Valley, emerged an empire of unprecedented scale and complexity in the Americas, Tawantinsuyu, the Inca realm of the four parts united. This colossal achievement, forged in a remarkably short period, was largely the vision and work of one extraordinary individual, a ruler of legendary status, whose name itself signified a world-altering impact, Pachacuti Inca, Yupanqui, the Earthshaker, the he who remakes the world. His reign was not merely one of conquest, but of profound transformation, laying the very foundations upon which the vast Inca Empire was built. The Incas, who called themselves the Runa, the people, traced their mythical origins to Lake Titicaca, from whence the creator god Viracocha sent forth Manco Capac and his sister wife Mama Oclo to found a civilization. They eventually settled in the fertile valley of Cusco, a basin nestled high in the Peruvian Andes, around the 12th or 13th century. For several generations, the kingdom of Cusco remained a relatively small and often embattled regional power, one among many competing ethnic groups and curacazgos, or lordships, vying for resources and dominance in the Andean highlands. Their early rulers, the Sapa Incas, or Solan Incas, engaged in local raids and alliances, gradually consolidating their control over the immediate Cusco region, but their influence rarely extended far beyond. The pivotal moment, the crucible from which the Inca Empire would be truly forged, arrived around the year. The Chunca, a powerful and warlike confederacy from the Andahuaylas region to the west of Cusco, launched a massive invasion, determined to crush the Incas and seize control of their valley. The reigning Sapa Inca, Viracocha, and his designated heir, Inca Orco, deeming the situation hopeless, abandoned Cusco, retreating with their court to a defensive position in the mountains. Panic gripped the city. It seemed that Cusco, the nascent heart of Inca identity, was doomed. But one of Viracocha's younger sons, Cusi Yupanqui, refused to yield. Displaying extraordinary courage and leadership, he rallied the remaining warriors and the citizens of Cusco, inspiring them to make a desperate stand. According to Inca oral traditions, later recorded by Spanish chroniclers, the battle was fierce and closely fought. At a critical moment, as Cusi Yupanqui called upon the creator god for aid, the very stones of the battlefield were said to have risen up as warriors, the Pururocas, to fight alongside the Inca defenders. Against all odds, the Incas achieved a stunning victory, routing the Chunca forces and saving Cusco from destruction. This triumph was not just a military success, it was a foundational event, imbued with divine sanction. In the aftermath of this miraculous defense, Cusi Yupanqui, hailed as a savior, deposed his father and brother, and was proclaimed the new Sapa Inca. He assumed the honorific title Pachacuti, a name that resonated with prophecies of a world-changing leader, signifying a cataclysmic overturning of the old order and the dawn of a new era. Pachacuti was not merely a charismatic warrior, he was a visionary statesman, a brilliant organizer, and a relentless empire builder. He understood that the survival and future prosperity of his people depended not just on defending Cusco, but on creating a powerful, unified state, capable of dominating the Andean world. He envisioned an empire, Tawantinsuyu, encompassing the four cardinal quarters of their known world, with Cusco as its sacred and administrative center, the navel of the universe. With this grand design in mind, Pachacuti embarked on a series of ambitious military campaigns, transforming the Inca army into a disciplined and effective fighting force. His strategies were a sophisticated blend of direct conquest, psychological warfare, and shrewd diplomacy. Before launching an attack, he would often send emissaries to neighboring lordships, offering them terms of peaceful incorporation into his growing empire. They could retain their local custom. Their traditional leaders, Curocas, would be granted privileges and positions within the Inca administrative hierarchy, and their people would benefit from Inca infrastructure and famine relief, in return for acknowledging Inca sovereignty, worshipping the Inca sun god Inti alongside their own deities, and providing labor tribute, mita, for state projects. Many groups, awed by Inca military prowess, or recognizing the advantages of alliance, submitted peacefully. Those who resisted, however, faced the full might of the Inca army, and once conquered, often experienced harsher terms, including the resettlement of their populations. Pachacuti, along with his capable son and successor, Tupac Inca Yupanqui, who often led campaigns in his father's later years, systematically expanded the empire's frontiers,
pushing north into modern Ecuador, south into Chile and Argentina, and eastwards towards the fringes of the Amazon rainforest. As the empire grew, Pachacuti recognized the need to transform Cusco, from a modest regional town, into a magnificent imperial capital worthy of its central role in Tawantinsuyu. He initiated a massive rebuilding program, completely redesigning the city. According to some chroniclers, he envisioned Cusco in the shape of a puma, a sacred animal in Andean cosmology, with the great fortress temple complex of Sacayuaman, built with colossal, intricately fitted polygonal stones, forming its head. The city was divided into Upper Hanan and Lower Huran, Moyades, reflecting Andean dualistic principles, and further subdivided into quarters representing the 4 suyus of the empire. The streets were straightened, plazas enlarged, and magnificent palaces for the Sapa Inca and the royal lineages Panacas were constructed. At the very heart of the city lay the Coricancha, the golden enclosure, the temple of the sun. Pachacuti had it rebuilt with exquisite masonry, its walls reputedly sheathed in plates of pure gold, its sacred garden filled with life-sized gold and silver effigies of plants and animals. Cusco became not only the political and administrative hub of the empire, but also its spiritual and ceremonial nucleus, a place of immense sanctity and power. Pachacuti's genius, however, extended far beyond military conquest and monumental architecture. He was, above all, the great organizer, the architect of the Inca state's intricate, administrative, economic, and social systems. He understood that a vast, diverse empire spanning some of the world's most challenging terrain required sophisticated mechanisms of control and integration. He implemented a series of profound reforms that touched nearly every aspect of Inca life. The empire was formally divided into 4 great provinces, or suyus: Chinche Suyu to the northwest, Anti Suyu to the northeast, Kanti Suyu to the southwest, and Kala Suyu to the southeast, each radiating from Cusco. These suyus were further subdivided into smaller administrative units, ideally based on a decimal system for organizing the population into groups of 10, 100, 1,000 and 10,000 households. This system facilitated the census, the collection of tribute in the form of labor rather than currency, which the Incas did not use, and the mobilization of manpower for state projects, such as road building, agricultural terracing, mining and military. This rotational labor service was known as the mita, a cornerstone of the Inca economy, through which the state harnessed the productive capacity of its subjects. To unify his burgeoning empire and facilitate communication and control, Pachacuti ordered the construction and massive expansion of the Kapak Yunan, the Royal Road, an extraordinary network of engineered roadways that eventually spanned over 25,000 miles. These roads, varying from wide, paved highways in the lowlands to narrow, stepped paths in the high mountains, traversed deserts, crossed precipitous gorges, on remarkable suspension bridges, woven from ichu grass, and linked every corner of Tawantinsuyu to Cusco. Along these roads, at regular intervals, were way stations, or tambos, which provided lodging, food and supplies for official travelers, state messengers and army units. A highly efficient system of relay runners, or chasquis, stationed at smaller posts between the tambos, could carry messages and small items across the empire with astonishing speed, ensuring that the Sapa Inca in Cusco remained informed of events in even the most distant province. Recognizing the critical importance of food security in the often unpredictable Andean environment, Pachacuti promoted agricultural intensification on a massive scale. The Incas became masters of terracing, constructing Andeans, or agricultural terraces, that climbed steep mountainsides, transforming otherwise unusable slopes into productive fields. They built sophisticated irrigation canals to water these terraces and the fertile valley floors, maximizing yields of staple crops like maize, potatoes and quinoa. To manage surpluses and guard against famine, Pachacuti established a vast system of state storehouses, or coal. Thousands of these circular or rectangular structures, strategically located near population centers, administrative hubs, and along the royal roads, were filled with preserved foodstuffs, like freeze-dried potatoes, or chunyo textiles, tools, weapons and other essential goods. These reserves were used to support the army, state officials, workers engaged in mita labor, and were distributed to the populace in times of crop failure or natural disaster. Pachacuti also played a crucial role in shaping the religious landscape of the empire. He elevated the worship of Inti, the sun god, considered the divine ancestor of the Sapa Inca, to the status of the principal state religion. Grand temples dedicated to Inti were built throughout the empire, and a powerful priesthood was established, with elaborate rituals and festivals punctuating the Inca ceremonial calendar. However, while promoting Inti worship, Pachacuti's policy towards the myriad local deities, wakas of conquered peoples, was generally one of incorporation rather than suppression. Important wakas from subjugated regions were often brought to Cusco, where they were housed in special shrines and honored, a shrewd way of asserting Inca dominance, while also integrating diverse local beliefs into the broader imperial religious framework. He also formalized the imperial cult of the royal mummies, the preserved bodies of deceased Sapa Incas, who were treated as still living entities, consulted for advice, and paraded in public ceremonies, reinforcing the divine authority and continuity of the Inca dynasty. To further consolidate imperial control and promote cultural integration, Pachacuti implemented a policy of resettlement, known as mitma, or mitimais. This involved moving entire communities from one part of the empire to another. Groups deemed loyal to the Inca state might be resettled in newly conquered, potentially rebellious territories to serve as examples and maintain Inca influence. Conversely, recalcitrant or troublesome communities might be relocated to established Inca regions, where they could be more easily controlled and assimilated. This policy, while sometimes disruptive to the lives of those resettled, was an effective tool for breaking down local resistance, spreading the Quechua language, which Pachacuti promoted as the lingua franca of the empire, and fostering a sense of imperial identity. He is also credited with codifying laws, standardizing weights and measures, and promoting certain artistic styles that became hallmarks of Inca imperial culture. During Pachacuti's reign, numerous royal estates and ceremonial centers were constructed throughout the empire. Among the most famous of these is Machu Picchu, the breathtaking lost city of the Incas, perched on a high mountain ridge. While its exact purpose remains a subject of scholarly debate, whether it was a royal retreat for Pachacuti, a sacred religious sanctuary, an astronomical observatory, or a strategic outpost, its construction during this era, with its exquisite Inca stonemasonry, perfectly integrated into the dramatic natural landscape, is a testament to the sophisticated engineering and aesthetic sensibilities of Pachacuti's architects and builders. Pachacuti Inca Yupanqui, after a long and transformative reign of over 3 decades, died around 1471 CE. He left to his son and successor Tupac Inca Yupanqui an empire vastly expanded, thoroughly reorganized and imbued with a powerful sense of purpose and destiny. Pachacuti's legacy was profound and enduring. He was remembered by subsequent generations of Incas, and recorded in their oral histories as transmitted to the Spanish chroniclers, as the true architect of Tawantinsuyu, a figure of almost divine status, a culture hero who had literally remade their world. He had transformed a small Andean kingdom into one of the largest and most complex empires of the pre-industrial world. The Inca state as shaped by Pachacuti was a remarkable achievement of human organization, particularly given that it flourished in a challenging mountain environment, and functioned without a system of alphabetic writing, though they possessed the quipu, a complex system of knotted cords used for record-keeping and possibly narrative purposes, the full understanding of which is still being deciphered. Their society, built upon principles of reciprocity, ani, communal labor, and a hierarchical yet interconnected social order, achieved extraordinary feats of engineering, agriculture and administration. The empire was a testament to their ability to adapt, innovate and impose order on a vast and diverse domain. Pachacuti's story is more than just the tale of a great conqueror. It is the story of a visionary leader, who possessed a rare combination of military prowess, administrative genius, and profound cultural understanding. He laid the institutional, ideological and physical foundations that allowed the Inca Empire to flourish, creating a legacy that, despite its eventual tragic demise at the hands of Spanish conquistadors, continues to inspire awe and fascination. The monumental stones of Cusco, Sacsayhuaman, and Machu Picchu, the enduring remnants of the Capacnan, and the echoes of Quechua, still spoken in the Andes, all bear silent witness to the transformative reign of the Sapa Inca, who truly earned the name Earthshaker. His vision shaped a world, and his achievements continue to resonate as a testament to the extraordinary capabilities of pre-Columbian American civilization.
On the banks of the Tiber River in central Italy, amidst rolling hills and fertile plains, a humble settlement began to take root sometime in the 8th century BCE. Legend tells of twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, suckled by a she-wolf, who founded this city, which Romulus named after himself, Roma. From these mythical beginnings, a small city-state would emerge, possessed of a unique blend of pragmatic governance, martial vigor and an almost inexorable drive for expansion. Over the next 5 centuries, the Roman Republic would transform from a local power in the Italian peninsula into the dominant force of the Mediterranean world, laying the foundations for an empire that would shape the course of Western civilization for centuries to come. This is the epic story of the Roman Republic's ascent, a tale of political evolution, military conquest, and the relentless ambition that propelled a small river town to the zenith of ancient power. The early Roman Republic, established around 509 BCE after the overthrow of a monarchical rule, was characterized by a complex and evolving political system designed to prevent the concentration of power. 2 annually elected consuls served as the chief executive magistrates, wielding significant authority but also accountable to the Senate, a council composed initially of patrician aristocratic families, who held hereditary privilege. Over time, the plebeians, common citizens, gradually gained political rights through a series of struggles, eventually securing representation in popular assemblies and the election of their own tribune, who had the power to veto actions of the Senate or magistrates that were deemed harmful to plebeian interest. This dynamic interplay between the patrician-dominated Senate and the plebeian assemblies, often marked by tension and compromise, became a defining feature of the Republic, fostering both stability and a degree of popular participation in governance. Central to Rome's rise was its formidable military. Initially, the Roman army was a citizen militia, composed of landowners who were obligated to serve in times of war. These legions, the backbone of Roman military might, were organized into tactical units that evolved over time, becoming increasingly sophisticated and adaptable. Roman discipline was legendary, instilled through rigorous training and a strict code of conduct. Their engineering capabilities allowed them to build roads, bridges, and fortifications with remarkable efficiency, facilitating movement and securing conquered territory. Furthermore, Roman pragmatism extended to their military practices. They were quick to learn from their enemies, adopting effective tactics and technologies. The first phase of Roman expansion focused on the Italian peninsula. Initially, Rome was surrounded by other Latin city-states, with whom it formed alliances, and also engaged in conflicts. The early republic saw a series of wars against neighboring tribes and cities, gradually expanding Roman territory and influence in Latium, the region around Rome. The Latin Wars 499–27–6 BCE ultimately led to Roman dominance over the Latin League, transforming former allies into subordinate partners. To the east, the rugged terrain inhabited by the Samnites posed a more significant challenge. The 3 Samnite Wars, 3043–290 BCE, were protracted and hard-fought, testing the resilience of the Roman military and forging a battle-hardened legionary force. Roman success in these conflicts secured their control over much of central Italy. The final major step in Roman unification of the peninsula came with the Pyrrhic War 2080–2075 BCE. The Greek city-states of southern Italy, fearing Roman expansion, appealed to Pyrrhus, the ambitious king of Epirus in Greece, for aid. Pyrrhus arrived with a well-trained Hellenistic army, including war elephants, and won several costly victories against the Romans. However, the Romans, with their superior manpower and unwavering determination, refused to yield. After Pyrrhus's eventual departure and defeat, Rome absorbed the Greek cities of southern Italy, completing its mastery of the peninsula. By the mid-3rd century BCE, Rome had become the dominant power in Italy, a unified entity with a large pool of manpower and resources, poised for larger ambition. Rome's gaze now turned westward, towards the island of Sicily, where its interests increasingly clashed with those of another burgeoning Mediterranean power, Carthage. Founded by Phoenician colonists from Tyre, Carthage had grown into a wealthy maritime empire, controlling extensive territories in North Africa, Spain and the western Mediterranean island. The rivalry between Rome and Carthage, 2 vastly different civilizations, one a land-based power built on citizen soldiers, the other a naval empire reliant on mercenaries and trade, was inevitable. This clash of titans would unfold in 3 brutal and transformative conflicts known as the Punic Wars. The First Punic War 26. Rome, initially lacking a strong navy, rapidly built a fleet, and through innovative naval tactics and sheer tenacity, eventually defeated the Carthaginian navy, forcing Carthage to cede Sicily and pay a hefty indemnity. This victory marked Rome's emergence as a major naval power and its first significant territorial acquisition outside the Italian peninsula. The Second Punic War 2018-2, sparked by Hannibal Barca's daring invasion of Italy, crossing the Alps with an army including war elephants, this war brought Rome to the brink of destruction.
Hannibal inflicted a series of devastating defeats on Roman armies at Trebia, Lake Trasimene and Cannae, where an estimated 50,000 to 70,000 Roman soldiers perished in a single day, one of the most crushing losses in Roman history. For over a decade, Hannibal ravaged Italy, his victories inspiring many of Rome's allies to defect. Yet Rome's resolve never broke. They adopted a strategy of attrition, avoiding direct confrontation while harassing Hannibal's forces and cutting off his supplies. The tide began to turn with the rise of Scipio Africanus, a brilliant Roman general, who daringly took the war to Carthage itself. Hannibal was recalled to defend his homeland and was finally defeated by Scipio at the Battle of Zama in North Africa, ending the Second Punic War. Carthage was forced to dismantle its navy, pay a massive indemnity, and cede its territories in Spain to Rome, leaving Rome as the undisputed dominant power in the western Mediterranean. The Third Punic War, 1409–1 to 1406 BCE, was a more brief and brutal affair, largely instigated by Roman hardliners, who feared a Carthaginian resurgence. Carthage, by this point significantly weakened and stripped of its military power, was deliberately provoked into war. After a prolonged siege, Roman forces under Scipio Aemilianus, the adopted grandson of Scipio Africanus, stormed and completely destroyed the city of Carthage. According to legend, the Romans sowed salt into the earth, symbolically ensuring that the city would never rise again. Carthage ceased to exist, and its territories in North Africa became the Roman province of Africa. The Punic Wars had a profound impact on the Roman Republic. They forged a powerful military tradition, honed Roman strategic thinking, and brought immense wealth and territory under Roman control. However, this expansion also brought significant social and economic changes. The influx of wealth and slaves led to the growth of large estates, latifundia, and the displacement of small farmers. The prolonged periods of military service took many citizens away from their land. The administration of the growing provinces created new opportunities for corruption and enriched a senatorial elite. The late Republic, roughly the 2nd and 1st centuries BCE, was a period of increasing social unrest and political turmoil. The widening gap between the wealthy elite and the impoverished masses, coupled with the challenges of governing a vast overseas empire, led to intense factional struggles within the Roman political system. Attempts at reform, such as those of the Gracchus brothers, Tiberius and Gaius, who advocated for land redistribution and other measures to aid the poor, were met with violent opposition from the conservative Senate, highlighting the deep divisions within Roman society. The late Republic also witnessed the rise of powerful military figures, who commanded the loyalty of their troops, often eclipsing the authority of the Senate. Marius's military reforms, which allowed landless citizens to enlist in the legions and promised them land grants upon retirement, created professional armies more loyal to their general than to the state. This paved the way for ambitious commanders to challenge senatorial authority. The rivalry between Marius and Sulla led to the first of a series of brutal Roman civil wars in the late 2nd and early 1st centuries BCE, further destabilizing the Republic. Sulla's eventual victory, and his bloody proscriptions, demonstrated the Republic's vulnerability to the ambition of powerful individuals and the willingness to resort to violence to achieve political ends. The 1st century BCE was marked by further political instability and the rise of even more dominant figures. The careers of Pompey, Crassus, and Julius Caesar, who formed the first triumvirate, saw these powerful men increasingly disregard the traditional checks and balances of the Republic in their pursuit of personal power and glory. Caesar's conquest of Gaul brought him immense wealth and a loyal battle-hardened army. His defiance of the Senate's order to disband his army and cross the Rubicon River in 49 BCE plunged Rome into another devastating civil war. Caesar's eventual victory left him in a position of unprecedented power. While he never formally abolished the Republic, his accumulation of titles and his dictatorial rule effectively signaled its end. His assassination in 44 BCE, by senators who hoped to restore the Republic, only led to further civil war among his former supporters, culminating in the rise of his adopted son Octavian, and the establishment of the Roman Empire under his rule as Emperor Augustus. And the Roman Republic, in its tumultuous 5-century journey, had transformed the Mediterranean world. Its political institutions, though ultimately unable to contain the ambitions of powerful individuals, provided a framework for governance and law that would influence later Western societies. Its military prowess and relentless expansion created a vast dominion, spreading Roman culture, language, Latin, and infrastructure across a vast territory. From a small town on the Tiber, Rome had risen to become the master of Italy, the conqueror of Carthage, and the dominant power of the Mediterranean. The spirit of its citizens, their resilience in the face of adversity, and their pragmatic approach to both governance and warfare, were key to its success. Though the Republic eventually succumbed to internal strife and the allure of imperial rule, Its legacy as a foundational power and a source of enduring political and cultural ideas remains profound, a testament to the remarkable journey from a humble beginning to the zenith of ancient power.
In the heart of the Austrian Empire, Vienna in the 1840s stood as a beacon of European culture, music, and ostensibly medical advancement. Its general hospital, the Allgemeines Krankenhaus, was one of the largest and most renowned teaching hospitals in the world, attracting aspiring physicians from across the continent. Yet within its imposing walls, a silent, terrifying scourge stalked the maternity wards, a phantom that turned the miracle of childbirth into a precursor of death for an appalling number of new mothers. This was puerperal fever, or childbed fever, a swift and often fatal illness that cast a pall of dread over the very place dedicated to bringing new life into the world. It was into this environment of medical prestige shadowed by inexplicable tragedy that a young Hungarian physician named Ignaz Philipp Semmelweis arrived in 1846. His keen observational skills and compassionate heart soon to be consumed by a desperate quest to unravel this deadly mystery. The Vienna General Hospital housed two maternity clinics. The first obstetrical clinic was a teaching institution, primarily serving doctors and medical students for their training. The second obstetrical clinic was principally for the instruction of midwives. For years a horrifying and inexplicable disparity had existed between these two clinics. The mortality rate from childbed fever in the first clinic was consistently, dramatically higher, often 5 to 6 times, sometimes even 10 times, that of the second clinic. Women assigned to the first clinic knew the grim statistics. Many were said to beg on their knees not to be admitted there, preferring to give birth in the streets, where their chances of survival, paradoxically, seemed better. The medical establishment attributed the fever to a host of vague and untestable causes: epidemic influences, miasmas, or noxious atmospheric conditions, cosmic telluric disturbances, emotional distress, or even the rough examinations by male students. None of these theories, however, could adequately explain the persistent, stark difference between the two adjacent clinics. Ignaz Semmelweis, appointed as an assistant in the first clinic, under Professor Johann Klein, was profoundly distressed by the daily parade of death he witnessed. He was not content to accept the prevailing explanations. Young, intense, and driven by a fierce sense of justice for the suffering women, he became obsessed with finding the true cause and a means of prevention. He began by meticulously collecting and analyzing mortality data, a practice not yet common in medicine. He noted that the rates in the first clinic fluctuated, sometimes wildly, but always remained significantly higher than in the second. He systematically investigated and ruled out numerous potential factors. Overcrowding was worse in the second clinic, yet its mortality was lower. Diet and general care were similar in both. The mode of delivery, birthing positions, even religious practices, none seemed to offer a coherent explanation for the deadly discrepancy. The emotional toll on Semmelweis was immense. He described the experience as agonizing, feeling personally responsible for each life lost under his care, yet powerless to stop the carnage. The crucial breakthrough came not from direct observation of the maternity patients, but from a tragic, unrelated event in early. Professor Jakob Kolechka, a respected colleague and friend of Semmelweis, who taught forensic medicine, died after accidentally pricking his finger with a student's scalpel during an autopsy. Semmelweis, deeply affected by the loss, carefully studied the report of Kolechka's illness and autopsy findings. He was struck by the chilling similarity between Kolechka's pathology, the widespread inflammation, the sepsis, and that of the countless women he had seen succumb to puerperal fever. A profound insight began to dawn in his mind. Kolechka had died from an infection, introduced into his bloodstream, by cadaveric particles, from the dissected corpse. Could it be that the doctors and medical students in the first clinic, who routinely moved between performing autopsies in the pathology lab and examining pregnant or laboring women in the maternity ward, were unknowingly transmitting similar decomposing animal organic matter on their hands to their vulnerable patients? This hypothesis provided a startlingly direct explanation for the difference between the two clinics. The midwives in the second clinic did not participate in autopsies and had no such contact with cadaverous material. The chain of transmission seemed horrifyingly clear to Semmelweis. The gentlemen's hands, as they were sometimes called, the hands of healers, were in fact the unwitting vectors of death. He theorized that if these invisible deadly particles could be removed or destroyed before patient examinations, the incidence of puerperal fever should plummet. Driven by this conviction, in late May of 1847, Semmelweis instituted a radical new policy in the first clinic. All doctors and medical students were required to wash their hands thoroughly in a solution of chlorinated lime before examining any patient. Chlorinated lime was chosen for its known ability to eliminate the foul odors associated with decomposition, and Semmelweis reasoned it would also destroy the putative cadaveric poison. The initial reception to this directive was mixed. Some found it an inconvenience,
others an affront to their professional dignity, implying they were unclean. But Semmelweis, armed with the authority of his insight and the desperation born of witnessing so much suffering, insisted on strict compliance. The results were nothing short of miraculous. Within weeks, the mortality rate in the first obstetrical clinic began to fall dramatically. By June it had dropped from an average of over 10% to around 2%. In July and August, there were months with 0 deaths from puerperal fever. For the first time the mortality rate in the doctor's clinic fell below that of the midwife's clinic. The statistical evidence was overwhelming, a clear and direct validation of Semmelweis's theory and his intervention. It seemed a monumental victory for medicine, a triumph of observation and reason that promised to save countless lives. One might expect such a groundbreaking discovery, supported by such compelling evidence, to be met with universal acclaim and rapid adoption. Instead, Semmelweis's findings encountered a wall of skepticism, indifference, and ultimately, outright hostility from much of the established medical community in Vienna and beyond. The reasons for this resistance were complex and deeply rooted in the medical culture of the time. Firstly, there was the matter of professional pride and ingrained hierarchy. The notion that physicians themselves, esteemed members of society, could be the primary cause of a deadly disease, essentially transmitting death to their patients through their own unwashed hands, was a deeply offensive and humiliating accusation for many. It challenged their self-perception as healers and their social standing. Professor Klein, Semmelweis's own superior, felt particularly undermined and became a staunch opponent. Secondly, Semmelweis's theory of cadaverous particles or decomposing animal organic matter as the cause of puerperal fever, while remarkably insightful, lacked a fully developed scientific framework at the time. This was several decades before Louis Pasteur's definitive work on the germ theory of disease and Joseph Lister's development of antiseptic surgery. Without the concept of specific microorganisms as causative agents, Semmelweis's explanation, though empirically supported, seemed vague and unproven to many. Prevailing medical theories still favored miasmas, atmospheric conditions, or internal constitutional factors as the causes of epidemic diseases. Thirdly, Semmelweis himself, while a brilliant observer and a compassionate physician, was not always a skilled diplomat or communicator. He was often described as intense, passionate, sometimes abrasive, and impatient with those who failed to grasp the urgency and importance of his finding. He was slow to publish his results in prominent German-language medical journals, initially communicating them primarily through lectures and letters. When he did publish more extensively, his writings were sometimes perceived as polemical and confrontational, further alienating potential supporters. He also faced obstacles related to his Hungarian nationality and perceived outsider status within the predominantly German-speaking Viennese medical establishment, where political and ethnic tensions sometimes simmered beneath the surface of academic discourse. Despite the continued success of his hand-washing policy in Vienna, the opposition mounted. Semmelweis found his efforts to promote his doctrine stymied at every turn. His lectures were sometimes poorly attended, his statistical evidence dismissed or reinterpreted to fit existing theory. In 1849, his contract as an assistant in the first clinic was not renewed. Disheartened and embittered by the lack of recognition and the pervasive resistance, he abruptly left Vienna in 1850 and returned to his native Pest, which later merged with Buda to form Budapest, in Hungary. For a time Semmelweis languished in professional obscurity, his spirit undoubtedly bruised by his experiences in Vienna. However, his commitment to his life-saving discovery remained unshaken. In 1851 he took an unpaid, honorary position as head physician of the obstetric ward of the St. Rocos Hospital in Pest. The conditions there were dire, and puerperal fever was rampant. Semmelweis immediately implemented his chlorinated lime hand-washing protocol. Once again, the results were dramatic and unequivocal. Mortality rates plummeted. Over a 6-year period, the rate in his ward averaged less than 1%, while in other parts of Hungary and Europe, where his methods were not adopted, childbed fever continued to claim a horrific toll. In 1855 he was appointed professor of obstetrics at the University of Pest. He enforced his antiseptic practices rigorously in his university clinic, achieving the same remarkable life-saving outcome. Yet despite these repeated demonstrations of efficacy in Budapest, the broader European medical establishment remained largely unconvinced or indifferent. Semmelweis grew increasingly frustrated and desperate as he saw his doctrine ignored, while countless women continued to die needlessly. He began to write a series of impassioned, often angry, open letters to prominent obstetricians and medical societies across Europe, denouncing those who rejected his findings as irresponsible and even as murderers. His major work, Die Etiologie, der Begriff und die Prophylaxis des Kindbettfiebers, the etiology, concept, and prophylaxis of childbed fever, was finally published in German. While it contained a wealth of meticulous data and powerful arguments, its difficult, somewhat rambling style, and its bitter, accusatory tone did little to win over his detractors. It was largely ignored or met with hostile review. The relentless struggle, the constant opposition, and the profound sense of injustice took a severe toll on Ignaz Semmelweis's mental and emotional health. From around 1865, his behavior became increasingly erratic. He suffered from severe depression, memory loss, and periods of agitation. The exact nature of his illness is still debated by historians, perhaps the cumulative effect of extreme stress and burnout, possibly an early-onset dementia, or even, as some have speculated, neurosyphilis, though conclusive evidence for the latter is lacking. In July 1865, concerned by his deteriorating condition, some of his colleagues and family members arranged for him to be taken, possibly under false pretenses, from Budapest to Vienna. There he was committed to a private insane asylum in Dublin. The circumstances of his final days are tragic, and somewhat obscure. Just 2 weeks after his committal, on August 13, 1865, Ignaz Semmelweis died at the age of 47. The official cause of death was listed as pyemia, or blood poisoning, resulting from an infected wound on his hand. It is a deeply poignant and bitter irony that the man who had dedicated his life to preventing such infections in others may have ultimately succumbed to one himself, possibly sustained from a beating by asylum guard, or perhaps from an accidental injury that became septic in the unhygienic conditions of the asylum. In the years immediately following his death, Semmelweis's work remained largely unacknowledged. However, the scientific landscape of medicine was rapidly changing. The groundbreaking research of Louis Pasteur in France, on the germ theory of disease, Joseph Lister in Scotland, on antiseptic surgery, and Robert Koch in Germany, on bacteriology, provided the firm scientific foundation that had been missing during Semmelweis's lifetime. These discoveries unequivocally demonstrated the role of specific microorganisms in causing infectious diseases, and validated the principles underlying Semmelweis's empirically derived antiseptic practices. Gradually, belatedly, the medical world began to recognize the profound significance of Ignaz Semmelweis's contribution. He came to be seen as a pioneer of antisepsis, a visionary who through careful observation and courageous persistence, had grasped a fundamental truth, long before his contemporary. His tragic story became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the resistance that new ideas, especially those that challenge established dogma and professional pride, can encounter. The term Semmelweis reflex was even coined to describe the reflex-like tendency to reject new evidence, or knowledge, because it contradicts established norms, beliefs, or paradigms. Today Ignaz Semmelweis is hailed as the savior of mothers, a martyr to medical conservatives, whose work ultimately revolutionized obstetric care and hospital hygiene, saving countless lives across generations. His insistence on hand-washing, a simple yet profoundly effective measure, is now a fundamental tenet of medical practice worldwide. His story is a testament to the power of individual observation, the importance of challenging conventional wisdom with empirical evidence, and the often arduous, painful path that scientific truth must sometimes travel before it is finally accepted. The quiet heroism of his lonely battle against an invisible killer, and the tragic personal cost of his unwavering commitment to saving lives, continue to resonate as a profound lesson in the history of medicine and the human condition.